I'm Luke Fretwell, and this is the GovFresh podcast. In this episode, we dive into a bold, state-sponsored experiment that reimagined how government can build digital services. In 2019, the state of California launched California Alpha, a 3-month prototype that challenged the status quo and showed what's possible when you start from scratch with a small, focused team and a clear mission. You'll hear directly from the people who built it, the early hurdles, breakthrough moments, and lessons that could reshape how public services are delivered. Whether you work in tech, policy, or public service, this is what it looks like to build government differently. Why don't we start off, everybody introducing themselves, what their role was in the project. And Angie, do you want to start off and just sort of pass it to somebody else?
Hello, my name is Angelica. Most people know me as Angie, and I was the lead of Alpha, and I will pass it on to Kimberly.
Hello, so I'm Kimberly Glenn, and I was the team success manager for Alpha. And I'll pass it on to Aaron.
Hey, I'm Aaron Hans, and I was the tech lead for Alpha, and passed to Art.
Hi, my name's Art. I was the interaction designer and UX lead for the project.
Carter?
And I'm Carter Medlin. I was one of the technical engineers for Alpha.
And I'm Luke, and I was a product designer and also helped kind of coach on working in the open. Angie, why don't you start for those, people who aren't familiar with what Alpha was, why don't you sort of set the context, what was the impetus for it, why was 3 months, and what the expectations were for it?
Sure. So at the time, I was serving as Assistant Secretary for Digital Engagement at an agency called Government Operations, which was championing the redesign of CA.gov, which was owned and for the most part operated by the Department of Technology, where I got to work and get to know Art and Carter and team very closely. It had been essentially a series of initiatives that we had led over the years, including improving the domain name system, which at the time I joked and called it the Carter system because he was the primary technical lead that built it. And Art and I had been working closely on the redesign of CA.gov. And we got to a point where we had a new governor that was interested in kind of seeing a better iteration, and we wanted to think and imagine a new way in which we could actually deliver services for California on just as a technical platform and more as an actual approach. And so that's how Alpha came to be. I was given the blessing and the permission to build a team to help me reimagine that experience of how Californians interact with the California government, and was given about 3 months to help redesign that experience. And so the idea was that we had this time box window where we could be bold and iterate and innovate and experiment and learn. And after those 3 months, we would determine what lessons learned we could actually apply into a longer term strategy of what we could do, not just with CA.gov, but more with the broader digital strategy for the state.
Okay. And it was a cross-functional team. I think we had technical, project management, design, development. It was like content design, user experience. Can you talk about what the roles were, why they were selected, and how you assembled that, how you assembled this team. And I guess as for, Kim, I know you were involved in that, and Angie, if y'all want to talk to that.
Yeah. I will punt to Kim and also Art at some point and to help answer this response. But initially, we knew we wanted to build what I called a multidisciplinary hybrid team. So until that moment, there wasn't a dedicated digital service team that included the traditional roles for service delivery, including obviously a technical lead, but also content designer, a user researcher, a product designer. And I wanted to make sure that it was both including the involvement of the folks that had already been working in this. So that's where Art and Carter came in because they clearly knew the limitations and the potential that we could apply for building the new CA.gov or a new phase of CA.gov.
Yeah.
And then obviously we wanted to have folks like Aaron and Hillary and Rebecca that brought in, and obviously you, to bring in the external expertise from the private sector industry to really bridge those two approaches and build one unified team that brought in all of those skills to experiment on what it would look like for us to come together and redesign that experience. And Kimberly was the first person that we actually brought on the team because I knew I needed a right hand that also just knew how to navigate relationships with our stakeholders, understood CDT really well, and she just brought on such a sense of innovation and optimism that I knew we definitely needed for us to be successful in this endeavor. I don't know if Kim, you want to add to that?
No, I when I got this opportunity, I had to reflect back. I can't believe how many years have passed and what an amazing experience. But I do recall looking for where we were going to structure and guide. And I know we'll get to it later, talking about the physical space, but just wanting to create this open, flowing environment, more than just a team that would ultimately work and operate kind of more in a family environment. Leaning on each other's skill set, being able to leverage from our own experiences and opportunities. I felt more like my role, kind of what Angie said. I had been around the state for a while and navigating some of the control agencies and other departments that we had to engage with. It was kind of in my wheelhouse to work through them and work through those pieces in addition to whatever else needed to be done. So when I think back to that time, I can remember anything from picking up furniture to filing reports to buying stuff. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, Angie, to note that, there were people on this team that worked in government and there were people who did not work in government. And for me and maybe Hillary, we had folks who had never worked in government. Aaron, never worked in government. Aaron, I don't think so. It was interesting that it wasn't just all government people on this team. You pulled people from, the outside, as they say. I think, Kimberly, to riff off of what you're saying about the physical space, that was important. And I think that I kind of underscored the importance because it didn't seem to matter to me because working in environments that weren't, sort of bureaucratic, it just seemed like standard. But can you talk about the space that was selected, why you selected that space and why that was so important? And I guess, Kimberly, Angie, Art, I think y'all were involved in making those decisions.
I think you touched on a big point. We wanted to find a space that was, of course, close enough to the Capitol, the folks that were sponsoring this effort so they could drop in, we could have transparency, but also to get away from some of that government, right? You didn't need badges. We didn't have cubicles. We didn't want to have walls. We wanted that experience of being kind of at a big table together and interacting, which is not a normal kind of environment that you would see for government staff. You know, they have an office or a cubicle, they work in a silo and not get that opportunity to engage. So location, openness, and together was really important for us.
Yeah. Art, do you have any feedback on the comments on that?
Yeah, I really wanted napping pods, the ones at Google where you can get in there and just, take a nap, but never got those. But we got really close as far as all the other tools, and it really was neat to sort of like work right across, as a designer working right across an engineer and being able to like in real time collaborate. That was really exciting. And then I think we had like whiteboards, and didn't we paint? We painted the walls.
Oh yeah, that's right.
We did.
So we could, use sticky notes or just literally write on the walls. And so, yeah, I think that was pretty exciting. And, also looking at just like the setup of working online remotely together, but also working in the office together. There's definitely something to be said when you're working along sort of a multidisciplinary team. Just magic happens.
Yeah.
And it was fun, right? It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Two things. There were two rooms, right? They were connected. One room was a little bit smaller, but there was basically like a big-ish community room with a table, tables put together to feel like this big table that we all worked at mostly. But there was a side room where, Aaron camped out to hide away from us, and Art, hid away from us. I don't know if Carter, Chad, I remember being there a little bit, but kind of bouncing back and forth. But there was definitely I think it was appropriate to have that for the to give headspace to people who just needed to be heads down and focused and not distracted. And designers and developers, need that. And I also think to your point around sort of remote, I can't remember what the dynamics were, but I think I was on site 2 days a week and off site 1 day a week. And I really wanted to try to push the bounds around working async, which, I think it did provide some challenges, but I think it also kind of helped people exercise muscles that had never been exercised. And did other people start to work remote regularly? Maybe Hillary, or I feel like, was it just me?
I think that we pivoted to remote once COVID happened, but for the most part during the alpha 3-month engagement, I want to say 90% of the team was definitely 90% of the time in person. And it became particularly valuable too when the team would put together a prototype, and then Hillary would organize a guerrilla user testing series where the team would just run into the park and grab random people walking by so they could do some user testing.
I
think we learned too, though. I think we learned through your struggles. I think for me, it was an education, how to make sure that people who were remote were involved. And that we were engaging you. And to me, which ultimately we led into this remote working world, but it was the first time where we had to really step back and make sure we have somebody on the line, or they can visually see what's going on and create a different type of engagement. So I think it was another thing we learned.
Yeah, and I remember when COVID happened, and there was a bunch of people. I don't know. In my head, I was like 100, but maybe it was like 25. And Angie, you invited me to the call. Kimberly was on the call. Kimberly, I think you were leading it. And then, Kimberly, you said something like, "Luke, are you on the call?" And I was like, "Oh no, I don't know any of these people. Am I in trouble?" And you said, you always told us to learn how to work remote. And you said, "Well, we're going to learn." But I mean, it definitely, I think it's funny how it's less of a thing now, but we're starting to see more RTO, and it's kind of becoming more of an issue, or more of a thing to work, in person together. Art, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I really appreciate having had to sort of deal with that situation and flex those muscles, if you will, because it really actually informed how we work remotely during COVID. And like one of the big takeaways for me was being a lot more intentional with how we work remotely, and just and then also inversely being more intentional how we work together in the office, right? So when we went from like fully remote to hybrid, that was I would even say more critical, being very intentional how we come together, right? Not just like the check a box. Oh, like I just showed up into my cube. But like actually leveraging the best aspects of working in person.
Yeah, I definitely felt like when we were together, it was very intentional and focused, or at least when I was there. I mean, I think everybody else was kind of working full time and I was kind of part time. So the 2 days I was there, it definitely felt very focused and intentional. So let's talk about challenges and breakthroughs early on. When we started, there were certainly challenges in adjusting both to each other as a team, but also just kind of that style of work. Can you guys talk about what were the challenges that you encountered in your roles, and what you thought, what was like really overwhelming or seemed insurmountable? And Carter, you want to start off? You've been quiet.
Challenges, yeah. Well, certainly the deliberate in person was something that was kind of unusual for state employees for as long as I can remember. It was individual cubicles, so large office spaces, and then putting us all in one deliberate space with no privacy. It was very alarming at first, but ultimately resulted in being able to work closer together and deliberate and working on the same projects, working on the same sprints. That was kind of unusual for state work. So just the challenge as far as learning how to work in those environments where you don't have the privacy and you're in each other's face, but you're all working on the same thing, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I think-
Aaron?
Oh, sorry.
Oh.
You want to go, Kimberly?
Well, I was going to add, because I think when I was thinking about the space, and one of the things that was very important to Angie and I is that to be open and not be government. I mean, we went for free space. We didn't want this experiment to be some costly endeavor that would cost the government a lot of money. So we used free space that was just sitting there that the state owned, and we got repurposed desks, and the tables all came from surplus, stuff that had been donated from other offices, so that we truly were kind of giving a free experience. So that was just something that I think, to me, when I think back to Alpha and think about how we're delivering stuff to California, that was really setting that pace that we were here doing that.
Yeah. Aaron?
One of the funny things, there were limitations on what we could pay for. And so we couldn't like pay for user testing services. So Hillary's like, take the phone out to the park, get some feedback. There's government employees and regular people walking around right there. Yeah. And it was funny. Like, that was really intimidating to me at first. But Carter was just the best. He was just so suave, walking up to people.
That was a lot of fun. That was fun.
It was slick.
Yeah, the live user testing, just going out and finding some person on the street, because we were downtown, there's a lot of traffic, and we just stand in front of a government building, and we'd have a couple teams going around the park, showing off an interface and sort of watching what they click on initially, and like, why did you click there? It's like, well, I thought that was the button for this, and like, and having that back and forth with an actual person who hasn't seen the interface is pretty enlightening and pretty instant and pretty cheap. I mean, it didn't take much. And we went right back and fixed the thing and went out again. Yeah. So that was a great experience. So I'd love to see more of that. But it does require you to be on location in a fairly well-populated area. Downtown is perfect for that.
Yeah. All right. What were your challenges other than dealing with me? What challenges did you have to deal with or felt like, were overwhelming to you?
Yeah, everything else was smooth now. I'm just kidding. No, it's definitely figuring out that workflow, because like when you look at more of a structured legacy type approach to projects or building anything, digital, it's like you have this either waterfall approach or you have like these handovers, right, that go from one silo to the next.
Yeah.
And so just really getting comfortable with like establishing that assembly line, if you will, and going like from research to sort of content design, and then the experience and testing, and just like, and having that be a smooth experience, but then also building in like this concept of iterations, right? And being able to like pivot and change and be flexible in that respect. And then finding the sweet spot of like, let's not invest too much into this direction or design because it just might not make sense. Just going to have to pivot or trash it. That was, in fact, I think one of my big takeaways was like, don't fall in love with your designs or whatever you're building. Be ready to like trash it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Angie.
Yeah, I do have a point. I actually think it was a miracle that the whole thing even happened, because they asked me to put together this team, find the space, like get all the equipment they needed in the span of just a couple of weeks. And somehow I had to convince all of you to work on this crazy thing that may or may not work in the span of a holiday period. And we don't quite know what we're going to deliver. And I think it was an exercise of trust, really, of like our sponsors trusting me, of like us learning to trust each other. I think that was like the craziest thing about it, the risk and the challenge. But also, I think it's the success of it, right? Like we all fully leaned into the approach and the principles that we embodied and adopted very early on as a team.
Yeah.
That I think it's that not just showed up in the way that we worked, but also in the product and the prototypes that we developed that made Alpha more than just a platform. It was an approach and a success. And Alpha was the team, right? Like this was the team, this was the brand.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Yeah, I would say like, for me, right, like the challenges were the remote stuff that we talked about, the distributed stuff, working in the open, and adjusting to that, like understanding that people weren't, familiar with working in the open. And, we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I think the big thing was like the context. I remember, there were external consultants or consultants that were advising on approaches, and the context I felt like was different. And we all started talking about where the conflict was. And we really started to gain confidence within ourselves and as a team. And then our context was our context. And we would take input from external consultants using their context. But we really, I think like once we all started to understand, like we have a different context and we are going to work based on that context. And I think like that was a challenge initially because I felt like we were like thinking about what the external consultants were saying and applying that, and not just stepping back and going, wait a minute, this doesn't layer 100% on what we're doing. We need to set our own context. And once we did that, I felt like it opened up, the challenge, a lot of the challenges around the work went away. Angie, when we talk about these challenges, can you talk about what the success expectations were? Like how were you and the powers that be defining success, or even the team?
Yeah.
What were the success metrics?
Well, there's symbolic ones and practical ones, right?
Mhm.
So, like, symbolically, I think we wanted to reinstate trust in some of the other stakeholders, including folks in the legislature, that the government still had the ability to try out new things and experiment, because this was around the same time that we had just established the Office of Digital Innovation, its Office of Data and Innovation. And so like we wanted to make sure that we got on board like folks that could continue to support the momentum if this initiative actually led anywhere. More broadly, I think we wanted to like whether it's quote unquote succeeded or failed, right? Like that depends on like who's asking the question. Like overall, the point was that we were going to try something different, and depending on the result, we were going to learn from that. Yeah. And that lesson will then inform the next step that we needed, right? Like, need to build a different team? Do we need to build a new team? Do we need to reorganize? Do we need to fund different types of projects? The whole experiment was going to inform that strategy, and so that was that was in itself success, right? Like being able to actually give California leaders the chance to iterate and experiment through this process by trusting the team to try out new approaches and see which approaches succeeded. I think another thing I was going to mention that was also a risk, but I also see as a success, is that we wanted to make sure that whatever we built was built with the consent and with the input from the state partners and department leaders, the program folks that are managing those programs and those services. And so I think that's also surprising that we were able to quickly engage with a lot of those leaders as we were creating and building prototypes to test, engage our assumptions. We were humble in how we approached each prototype, understanding that we were not the program experts of those services. Yeah. But we wanted to make sure that we were working with them to enhance the delivery of the services that they were responsible for and managed. And so I think that basically it. I think again, symbolically, like, can we build and keep trust so we can continue to do this thing? And like more practically, can we get people on board to actually continue to fund this project and like these type of engagements? Yeah.
Yeah, I think like with challenges and success, right? They're both encompass moments of like realization, like aha moments. And can y'all talk to those moments for yourselves? Like what was, Cardi, you mentioned going to the park and prototyping. Can y'all speak to aha moments that you had within the project? And Carter, maybe can you start with, the live prototyping?
Right. So live prototyping. So because we were downtown, we were able to go out and utilize the vast number of people walking around to interview them on the spot and find their honest input on new interfaces. So we literally hand them a phone and say, see if you can search for a service or search for whatever service you're looking for. And we'd instantly find out that, they didn't go to the right icon, or they would scroll, or they would do something that we didn't expect. And that was hugely enlightening. So we'd be able to take that back, run that back through user research, and immediately make the change, go out and try it again. So it was a really quick way to get real human interactions, and it didn't cost us anything, just a little bit of walking around and having some FaceTime with some people. So that's absolutely something that state agencies, other states, you get the chance, go ahead and just go find people on the street and try your interfaces.
Yeah. Yeah. Kimberly, what about you?
I think it was a complete different experience, right? We were kind of commingled together. Usually you work with people with similar roles. So learning to engage and figure out, best place for different types of conversation. I think my most memorable moment when I think of you, Luke, I think about when we were probably a couple days in, I don't know, Aaron can help me out, and we didn't want to be open. And that
we'll talk about that.
And I'm like, that is like one of my fondest memories. And it's kind of something that has kept me pushing that envelope and transparency. So to me, I just like Carter, the experience to actually get out there and work with the people we're providing the service for, what was amazing experience, right? Because today we work in buildings and we don't get to engage with the people who get these services and really understand their needs. So That to me is big.
Yeah. Aaron, any aha moments?
A critical thing is the efficiency. Like, we weren't wasting any time. Like, it's really demoralizing if you're doing some tech work and you're building something and then, the strategy changes and we don't ship it, or you spend a lot of time on something and then you realize it doesn't work. And so these fast feedback loops just prevented all of that. We didn't like spend a lot of time building something and then go, oh, it was wrong. We wasted that effort. And so just in everything that we did, and we shipped a ton of stuff, and we shipped a ton of stuff several times because we learned while we were building it. It was just really fulfilling to get that high speed feedback loop and know, even if you had to rebuild it, you didn't waste hardly any time in each step.
Art?
Yeah, I think I've had several, talked about a little bit about sort of like being more intentional and working together and finding like a good, a smooth transition and handover type of process, and just working in that multidisciplinary team. The other thing too was like focusing too much maybe on getting like not focusing too much on getting like the code perfect or like the how, but really focusing on the what, if that makes sense. So, being able to, like what Aaron's saying, iterate quicker and just not spending a tremendous amount of time in making like the code perfect, and taking advantage of like existing frameworks was another thing, right? Is instead of reinventing the wheel, taking advantage of what's out there, best practices, whether it's design systems or templates, and just being able to like build with that more rapidly.
Yeah. And Angie?
I was actually just going to go back to you, Luke, because I think you played a critical role in really helping and encouraging the team to embrace openness.
Yeah.
That I think it was an aha moment for the entire team. It was a pivotal moment for the team to have, I think, a sense of relief in realizing that it's okay, we can do this.
Yeah.
Would love to like get your take and thoughts on why you thought it was important, why you pushed us, and like what we did to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think like, this gets into kind of like how we developed, how we designed, and how we developed. And I remember, Angie, you and I worked on a project, Code California, and we built it in the open. I think 2 people in the world saw it. Maybe there was somebody, I think we demoed that was a senior leader that was like, wow, this is amazing, the transparency and, project management. But it was kind of under the radar, but it helped, I think you understand what it meant to work in the open, but it also kind of gave cover for, it wasn't super public, so it was safer. And, just being somebody who's a, fan of open culture, and it's kind of my default. I think my expectations for everybody else feeling, comfortable. I didn't realize, it's all being open, working in the open is relative. And, when you reached out to me, you asked like, look, I need a product designer, but what I really would like for you to do is help coach on working in the open. And, there were two aha moments related to that. One, I remember y'all came to my house and we had dinner here. Well, not everybody, but several folks did. And I made a comment about we need to launch a web page. We need to launch something by the end of the week. And everybody was like, what? And I said, even if it's just one page. And everybody was like, okay, like it wasn't a problem. So for me, that was sort of like, okay, this team is, they're not, it's to Aaron's point, they're not messing around, right? Like they're going to be okay with shipping. And then the other thing was, the open, right? And the story as I know it, right? Like we put everything in the open. And then I remember getting a call from Angie, I think it was when I wasn't there, and said, I need to talk to you. And I was like, what's happened? This is, what emergency has happened? And then you told me that all the repos had been put to private. We had a conversation about it, you and I did. And then I think I went into the office the next morning, because that was my day to go in. And I remember we all sat around the big table It was, we had our family meeting and we had a really good conversation about like working the open, what that means. And to everybody's credit, it was just sort of like, okay, let's do it. And I know, there were folks that it was just like something different. But to me, the aha moment and just sort of like working in the open, which is, something that we adopted as a principle when everybody was bought, like it was a very constructive conversation. It wasn't an easy conversation. And there was definitely anxiety from certain people, different levels of anxiety. But I think like once everybody was like, okay, let's do this, we're going to do it. It just felt like it was an aha moment for me. Like, okay, we can have these real tough conversations and we're going to work in the open. And so it was just sort of like, I think, as we talk about like our development and design process, I think that conversation was, an important conversation. And I think it helped us how we worked and how we made decisions. And I don't know, like just in general, in the working and open, does anybody have any thoughts? Or I know Kimberly, you made some comments, but maybe you can expand on sort of where you were with that and how things evolved for you. But it would love to hear from folks on, working in the open, how it started, how it went, how it's going, and just any issues around it. Kimberly, you want to?
If nobody else.
Okay.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Carter.
Basically, the state of California, all of our projects have been behind closed doors. The code being kept secured as default. And so I remember when you mentioned default to open, I just thought it was insane.
Yeah.
And because that's what we've been doing. We've been doing, what do you mean share your code? Someone might find a problem with it, and that would be an issue, obviously.
Yeah.
But you convinced me, and then default to open sort of became something I've been sort of pushing everywhere I go. It's definitely, there are some things to think about, especially from a technical standpoint, making sure that you have good practices with regards to keeping your password secure, and it ends up being just good practices in general. But the result is your code, your processes being out there, the public looks at it, it's not, you're not having all these vulnerabilities that are being exposed. You have people actually looking at it and potentially commenting on it. We did have one experience, and I got to kind of talk about this at one of the presentations, where one of our builds, we just had something not configured properly, and some random person from the public saw it on our repository, and then created a pull request with an update to it, describe what was going on. I looked at that, I was like, okay, this is an opportunity here. We're going to take what this person has found and go through the process of sort of vetting it and getting it included in the build and deploying it and sort of giving them credit. And so we were able to do that. But that kind of sold me on, get everything out there, and if there are problems, more people are willing to comment about that and make the fix and be part of the process, and therefore you're doing it right. So going forward, default to open has sort of been the way to go.
Yeah,
Kimberly,
I think there was
Kimberly,
great fear. Yeah, and anxiety people were feeling. I think, like Carter said, about being open, right? The judgment or what people will say. And I still kind of giggle. I remember the first time we got a comment, we're like, what do we do with this? What do we do? It's like, respond to the person, right?
Yeah.
But it is something that I've carried with me. Now in every role that I take, I really push people to be open and transparent. So, but yeah, it does still make me laugh sometimes how we were so used to being closed off.
Yeah.
And you don't even realize it. I think, to me, you kind of just do your thing, and just creating the open space like we talked about earlier. It was a new way for people working, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Aaron, any comments on working in the open?
It was really cool when we carried that forward into the COVID project and did everything in the open there.
Yeah.
And Carter had some cool services that were writing the data into GitHub repos. And so people could just glance at the data and see the number change or the data more easily with people outside of the government. And it was extremely useful in that.
When you plan on real quick, when you plan on default to open, then that sort of changes how you set things up so that your comments and
Yeah.
your language that you use are more public friendly. So if you do it from the beginning, it's much easier as opposed to trying to open up something that has had private work done.
Yeah, that's a good point. Art, anything?
Yeah, I think it also underlined how if we were sort of like under this mindset, right, when we had to like sort of get out of our bubble or our government box, right, Pandora's box, that really underlined or underscored how other digital teams across the state were probably doing the same.
Yeah.
And the issue of that interoperability. And like we could do so much more. I remember one of the use cases was we were working with Caltrans, right, for like different events, right, on the road conditions and things like that. And just like realizing we could build so much more, right, if they had exposed, like, for example, the data that they were already having and making it available and just being even open inside of the state, right, between the different state entities and things like that, and the need for such a framework. So yeah, it really, really underlined that point that for government, there's a lot of inefficiency in government. There's teams like all over the place reinventing the wheel almost, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and kind of playing into the open, right? Like we worked in GitHub, we had public repos, we had a project board, right? And I know, like, especially for you, Kim, right? Like, not only like as you mentioned, like working in the open, but the tools. So you had to learn GitHub, and it's not easy. I mean, it's easier now, but then it was not super intuitive. We worked in open, but also in an agile framework. And that also, especially at that time, I mean, I think it was post healthcare.gov. So people were adopting agile, but still relatively new to government. Can you talk, Kim and Angie, can you talk about the agile project management, how we worked with respect to agile and any sort of challenges, and how you overcame those?
Well, I know for me, it was an incredible learning experience because I hadn't really, as being actually a traditional project manager within the state,
Mm-hmm.
we read about agile, we talk about agile, but the state really hadn't been doing what I now understand as the agile methodologies and the ceremonies and the weekly touch points, or even for me, I remember just even learning, the check-in in the morning of, 1 to 2 minutes, like, here's my issue here,
Yeah.
those activities were a new experience,
Mm-hmm.
that really wasn't in our daily work, that I was used to, and just how we track things or discuss things or how we move things around. So for me, it was a new experience to truly do what I would call today agile activities, creating the ceremonies, learning to sprint, learning to, deploy, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of times we just iterate, even in the best project, we keep trying to get to this best thing instead of just shipping. I think is
Right.
the word that's better, that we would ship and move and be able to openly show something that wasn't done. I
Yeah.
remember the first couple of times bringing in the executives to just talk to them and walk through what we're doing transparently. That is not something that traditionally would happen, right?
Yeah.
You'd have to have this polished product. And so, really cool. Those are amazing experiences. So I'll lean
Yeah.
to Angie.
I think Kim, you covered it beautifully. I think something that I realized about that process too is because it was technically my first time also, quote unquote, being product manager, and you realize you make it up as you go. Like, you build trust with the people that you have, and you follow your intuition, and you're going to learn from the process and delivering, and you build trust with the right stakeholders to make sure that you have that support. And if you mess something up, you fix it and then you move on. And I think about Alpha specifically, we were able to essentially do like 3 quick shipments. Like we shipped 3 times within that period of time, and several products within each time. And I think what was important to me was, and we haven't quite talked about this, and we'll probably lead into it in some moment, is that we were still capturing what the baseline was around how are we actually improving the service that we're assuming through like accessibility, readability, or performance. Like what was the before and after? And what are we actually learning as a team? And then being very vocal in communicating our assumptions and what we're learning in the process as we are in the actual iterative agile cycle. I think the retros and all the ceremonies were really, really helpful. I think that's also what helped about being in person, is because we could quickly resolve things in time, like in real time, as opposed to having to schedule a meeting for us to talk through like problems and things along those lines. So there was a lot of learning that took place during this process, and being able to practice agile delivery, agile development with the team that was brand new team, multidisciplinary, but also hybrid, was a challenge, but it was something that we clearly we pulled it off really well. And I think because we built a really solid team.
Yeah. So related to development, and I think similar to kind of open and being agile, it was also sort of an accessibility. Accessibility is obviously big in digital services, but I think that there was also kind of, everybody was kind of learning. I mean, even back then it was still kind of a newish thing to kind of really get your head around. And, we talked a lot about accessibility and inclusion, and, California has is a very diverse population. So we definitely had a lot of conversations about that. Aaron, Art, others, can you talk about the work that we did around accessibility and how that fed into the design development, and just the work in general?
What I've noticed, since this was my first job in government, is I was just extremely impressed by the dedication of almost everybody I met to, delivering highly accessible stuff.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of barriers and, different priorities that people are juggling. And so it doesn't always work out. But like the desire is there from, so many government employees. They really want to make things work for everybody. And that's in contrast to like my experience prior to that in the private sector, where the work on accessibility stuff and you just get blocked and you have to go to legal and say, hey, we're exposed here.
Yeah.
Put this on the roadmap. But like, government employees just have this, kind of selfless desire to, put the work in to make it work for all the people in the state of California and everywhere, and so that was just really refreshing and awesome to see. And then in terms of what we were doing, like we were building automated accessibility tests into our deployment pipelines.
Yeah.
Performance, in my mind, is a huge aspect of accessibility, because if someone has a device with a slower CPU, it's going to drive them crazy when their benefits portal takes 60 seconds to load. And so we're making tech choices to make sure that things are fast. We're using web components instead of some heavy framework.
Mm-hmm.
We're, putting the compute into the API so we don't have, a huge client-side dependency chain. And Carter did some really cool stuff with translations.
Yeah. Yeah, Carter, you want to talk about the translations?
Oh, yeah. So we had part of the build process, we were using static site generation, which we continue to use at a lot of our projects. That's a huge improvement in performance. But we would actually put out translated versions of every page, and we would have basically had a spreadsheet that had terms in English and then in Spanish, and we would translate those into all the other languages. We also discovered that if you start with Spanish as a source language, because it's more precise in its translation, you're going to get better results as opposed to using English. That was a huge discovery. So we would translate starting with Spanish. We had a couple of Spanish speakers on the team. They would translate everything into good Spanish, and we would take that and use that to inform all the other translations for all the products. That was a huge win. But like Aaron was saying, I remember Aaron would always talk about how, like, we need to make sure we're targeting the slowest boost, like just minimum, make sure it works on every on whatever network they're using. And fortunately, everything you do to improve performance on the slowest mobile devices improves everything else. It makes the performance better for every other aspect of it. And all of our work to improve using the proper accessibility tag has now led to improved reading typing. So basically, whatever we figured out is assisted with the ability of AI scrapers to understand our content. So that's a huge win going forward.
Yeah, can't remember who it was. Another agency came in and gave a presentation on JAWS and showed the site in JAWS, and it helped everybody kind of understand what accessibility was. And it wasn't just sort of fonts and colors. It was the structure, the structured HTML. And I think that was like an aha moment for a lot of us. And aligned us on accessibility. That was, I think that was really helpful. Aaron, you mentioned or do you have anything on accessibility you want to add?
Just to like underscore what you just said, I think Angie got the Department of Rehabilitation to come in.
Yeah.
And they weren't just showing screen readers, they were showing us like all kinds of different tools where they would have to interact with voice,
Yeah.
So just so many aspects to, keep in mind there when you're shipping stuff. That was really helpful, Angie.
Yeah, I think that was, like, I would say, like, bringing them in, and maybe it was, I can't remember when you brought them in, but the sooner you can bring somebody like that in after you ship something to kind of get everybody aligned and see, I would say the better. Because I think it really helped everybody align around, what accessibility meant and what content design meant, and what was, how those different devices work. Art, anything?
Just underscoring the point of like how aspects you wouldn't traditionally think about, like being blockers for accessibility or access, right? Like, whether it's performance, whether it's good content design, plain language, the way you do translations, like whatever it may be, it actually all plays an important role in overall experience, right? And just making things more accessible. So yeah, that for me, that was like, traditionally it's like, oh yeah, let's make this accessible and add some alt text, but even like that's a whole science, right? Like there's the right way to do that and there's a bad way to do that, but there's just so many other factors, right, that play a role. Performance is another huge one, right? Compatibility with devices. It's easy to just pull up your latest iPhone and be like, oh yeah, this works great, but like, well, not everyone enjoys a state-of-the-art device. There's a bunch of people on different types of devices. Some people are maybe on a shared computer in the library or whatever that may be, right? So
Yeah. Aaron, you talked about, or Carter, one of y'all talked about the components and building. Can you talk about kind of the technical approach that you were advocating, you took just generally, maybe sort of the stack, but also how you were thinking about, delivering the components and things related to that, both iterative and making sure that you were moving fast and not breaking things, but still just kind of building building fast and being intentional, but also kind of what's under the IT hood. And maybe Aaron, you and Carter can talk to that.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things we did, we had the end-to-end tests built into the deploy pipeline along with the accessibility tests, and we caught regressions, when we changed code. And one thing that was really fun is we had these great presentations that were set up where we were sharing our techniques with everyone in the government. And after one of those, Chad had people huddled around his desk, and he's demoing the end-to-end test, showing how it's catching stuff for us and how to run them and how they can take this back to their departments and do something similar. And that was just a really cool moment of kind of, sharing that little tidbit with people who, just weren't aware of it before.
Yeah.
And the tech stack, like, we're trying to make it easy. We're not creating a production maintenance burden for ourselves. So we're using Lambdas for APIs. We're using static site generation. The static site generation we took immediately into the COVID project, and then they shut the state down. And then, like, the traffic on our sites just went through the roof. And everything was, we didn't have any kind of high server processing bills. Nothing went offline because, a lot of that processing was done at, the deploy time. And then I talked before about web components, lean front end, just to have a high performance site. And what else? Carter, Art?
Going to the .NET, or sorry, going from what State Service usually uses, which is .NET Microsoft, to the Node.js JavaScript stack was a great jump, because the skills, your JavaScript skills, go from client to server. So that was an excellent choice, and we've been using that going forward. That was certainly huge. Art, did you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I think like figuring out a framework and establishing some patterns that are reusable, or components, right? Just this notion of building blocks. We started scratching at the surface of that. I don't, we didn't really quite get matured where we wanted to be, but it definitely at least made me realize that how useful frameworks are, how useful design systems can be, and different components that are reusable, right, in different scenarios for more rapid prototyping. So that was definitely something I would have liked to work on, but we're working on it now. So it's definitely a lot of projects that are an extension of this.
The latest CA Gov build has benefited tremendously from our research from Alpha. It is screaming fast because of the static site generation, a lot of the tools and techniques we use. So we're able to serve up some pretty fast pages, make it very accessible, all because of what we learned from Alpha.
Amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you guys also talk about, how that impacted COVID, and we can get to that because the timing of the end of Alpha and the beginning of COVID was, I don't know if serendipitous is the right word, but it just sort of coincided, at the same time. And a lot of that stuff from the project management to the technology implementation sounds like it influenced it a lot. Angie, it would be good to get back to, we talked about successes and defining success. I think like understanding kind of from you, but everyone, what were the sort of key takeaways on, the success, the things that made this project successful to you. Angie, you want to start, and we can just sort of, everybody can kind of chime in.
Yeah, I mean, I think the attributes that made this successful were we had sponsorship from the top.
Mm-hmm.
The sponsorship enabled us to have their trust, so we could ask for the resources that we needed when we needed them. And most importantly, we were given discretion and trust to work together as a team to determine what we were going to be shipping. And I think that's incredibly important, that if you're sponsoring anything like this, that you're able to give the team that you're empowering that trust for them to be able to come to you with potential solutions or even challenges, so that you're just redefining the problem and solving for the right problems.
Yeah.
I think that was one of the critical things. The second thing was really just literally having the team, right? Like, I think the mix of skills that we were able to bring together as well as the expertise that we had from the folks that had already been working on these issues for years, was critical, right? Like it takes a village. That was one of the mottos and the statements that we had on the wall, right? Just on your own and in a silo. I think we were very intentional in adopting principles, which is, I think, would be like one of those factors I would say that was critical to the success. That as you were defining what those principles are that enable how you work as a team and the products that you produce is critically important. So for us, that was, as we've talked about, like working on the open and accessible first. It's like two key examples. And last but not least, like just shipping things, right? Like literally just doing something. I think my aha moment, the most exciting thing was when we actually just launched our Hello World page, and literally was just a page. But I think it really practiced. It gave us like muscle memory for us to begin to work together at like shipping more often, more quickly, and on harder things. And this was alluded to earlier in the conversation, but I think had we not exercised this muscle as a team, I think we would have had a much harder time at them being tasked as a team to put together COVID-19.ca.gov and their response efforts. We learned a lot from this experience, and being able to apply those lessons learned, not just in the COVID response, but as Carter just mentioned too, like throughout other products that the state has delivered, has paid dividends, and that shows that you have made an impact in some way. And so, if you're going to be building teams like this, like make sure that what you're building is both iterative, but it also takes into account the ecosystem that you're building into, so you're transforming it along the way.
Anybody else have any thoughts on critical factors that made this project a success, whether in the moment or, as some of y'all have alluded to, the impact that it's had longer term?
I'd like to comment. So I kind of define a successful project as a project you'd want to do again in the same way. And certainly that the alpha, the 3 months that we spent, I mean, I feel like there'd be value in even repeating this at this point because of what we were able to learn. But we did do a lot of work on setting up the team for in-person work, which is something that's hugely important right now. And unfortunately, I believe that a lot of what we learned through that process was sort of lost in the years. And I think as we're returning to work, I don't think we're taking what we learned from Alpha and applying it. So I guess I would like to see a do-over for that, to see if we can get in-person work to be a little better now that we're all, at least state employers or state employees are required to work in person. So I think in the next couple of months, we're going to see reverting back to old, inefficient in-person work. And we had it really figured out during Alpha. So that's kind of, we learned the tech that came out. We have all sorts of best practices and ways to do projects that are great and have certainly carried forward. But the in-person work, I think we lost.
Yeah.
I would say, I think one of the trust, because we had the ability, which is missing a lot. People in loop, bring yourself in, right? Bring in experts to assist. People weren't working in a position number or a position title. We were working together as a team. We weren't putting each other in boxes. If we found a gap, one of us just figured out how to fill it. So to me, that's more that open, that kind of free flowing is missing. I would agree with Carter that a lot of that kind of team dynamics and being together is kind of at a loss right now. So people are going to struggle. They're going to come back to a cubicle, four walls, and not, be able to think outside of the bigger picture. So.
Yeah. Art.
But people let us do it. They trusted us. We said, we need this person.
Yeah.
I'll just add, you can have all these different like project frameworks, even agile, right? Big A agile versus a small letter A agile, and just being flexible, and like you could have the rituals, but then just seeing like, you know what, this isn't really working for this sprint. Let's change something. Let's pivot where we need to make what we're doing work for that particular goal. But I had the privilege of, in fact, right after this project ended, I ended up being able to manage a team back at the Department of Technology, and I had the privilege of almost doubling the team and establishing one of the state's first like UX teams, or at least for that department, right? And I mean, this uh, project served as a blueprint for me to help establish and cultivate like an award-winning team. And a lot of the work that we've been doing is, I mean, I would say it's like directly related to the success that we've had here. So, and then to Carter's point, starting to kind of remember those lessons again as we're coming back full time, and once again being a lot more intentional in how we work together. Is going to also benefit us.
Okay, Aaron, any thoughts from you?
I liked Angie's point about the velocity. That was critical. Once we got going, we started shipping tons of stuff. I think we're going for like 20 applications in a 3-month period, and we rebuilt a lot of those several times when we were learning as we were building them. So that was critical. And it was also so cool to have partners in the different agencies that were helping us understand what they really needed. Like people at the water board were hilarious, like Greg and Raphael coming by and just explaining all the data. But that was just so enlightening and helpful. Fun process.
Yeah, I would say like everybody like this level, there was not a lot of ego, right? I mean, there were definitely certain people who had opinions or were anxious and sort of wanted to hold on to like a way of doing things, or preconceived notions that they brought from their previous work. But I think like the willingness to sort of let go of that and embrace something new, I think was hugely critical. And, there were several folks in different areas that did that, and that were very effective. And I think that was huge. But I also think that a great project is only as good as the product owner. And I think Angie, the humility and the emotional intelligence that you had and have generally, I think were hugely critical in managing kind of me, but like everybody and everything that was going on in such a short period of time, especially me. But I think that those were, to me, like those are things that, I think were hugely critical in a project like that. Anybody want to comment? Art, you want to comment on that?
I was just saying, managing contributors like you was really awesome.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, there was definitely.
Oh, you pushed us. You pushed us as well, Luke. Yeah.
There was definitely a lot of.
That was, I would say, if I can just like.
Go ahead, Bart.
Yeah, I'll just add that, like, having such a fresh perspective from people like you and pushing us, right? That was super awesome, because we were being pushed in all different ways, like pushing our understanding, pushing how we work, like just the whole thing was a really great experiment.
Yeah, I mean, when retrospecting it after, it's the people dynamics is fascinating. So one of the things, and I wish JP was here to join us, we shared the work early and often. And Angie, do you want to share like how we did that? And I mean, I can chime in as well, but I think that, there's working in the open and then there's the narrative in the open. And I think like we did both of those. And a lot of that, like both of those were, uncomfortable and different in their own right. But Angie, you want to talk about like how we did that?
Yeah, I think that was a critical part of the approach to and our process, both like in the sprint cycle, but also what we shipped. Because in it, capturing what we were learning, our assumptions, and then we're planning on prioritizing next in our sprint
Yeah.
was a way for us to self-organize around those shared goals.
Mm-hmm.
So again, capture those assumptions so that we could also communicate them with a broader audience.
Yeah.
And blogging about it, I think it also held us accountable to others beyond just ourselves and like our sponsors, right? Like I think there were at the time other digital service teams that were getting spun up that would read up on every blog post that we would have, and they would take inspiration from that to then apply it to their teams, which they think was really, really awesome to see. I think we would do our weekly done doings. Essentially, this was the process that we embodied. So at the end of every week, JP and I would sit at that big table and basically talk through what did we do this week. He would talk to all of you individually to get a specific like understanding and a take around how did you build this on the technical side, but also like what about the stakeholder side. So there was an intention around making sure that the voice of each of the team members was captured in what we were writing.
Yeah.
And we would also, again, basically project the things that we were hoping to learn from our next sprint and what we actually had learned from the previous one. So this was a process that I think really helped gel the team, again, align around those specific goals and be able to translate for the stakeholders or the project folks that wanted to follow along our progress, but maybe didn't quite understand how to navigate GitHub. Like it gave a translated version of the work that we were doing in a more consumable way. So I think that was also critical to the success and the progress that we made through this endeavor.
Yeah. Does anybody have any comments on kind of how we were communicating and how that might have been different, or how that's different from, previous work with government or even current work?
I can quickly mention that just the sense of accountability and just like putting yourself out there, being vulnerable, and just being comfortable, feeling uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
That was really it. But it's really, whatever theory you may have, it's really always going to be much more rewarding than you think and expect. So that's something that I remember.
I remember being nervous when we first were trying to craft what we were going to say. And then towards the end, it was kind of beautiful because every day it came easier and easier to talk about what we've done, what we've accomplished, even our failures.
Yeah.
I think Alpha was the first time to me that it was okay to fail and quickly pivot to something else. You didn't have to just, I will say with government work, sometimes they just keep going even though they know they should change. And so that exposure and being able to talk about when we've pivoted and made changes just made it easier and more comfortable for others to do that. So I think it set good precedent for future digital teams also.
I have an experience on this. So JP wanted us to do to have like our own Twitter accounts and like tweet about things, and I kind of resisted that. I was thinking about the average state employee, and do they really want to be an influencer when they're doing their development, and they can still work in the open and let the code do the talking. And so that was kind of my what I thought if I was going to communicate to the rest of the state worker community what to do, that made sense to me.
Nugget about that. So I did a lot of tweeting at that time. So obviously we would write the blog posts and then we would share them through like Twitter and LinkedIn, but primarily Twitter at the time. And I remember one of the staffers from the legislature that like sits in the budget like committee literally tweeted back like, "I'm watching." I have a screenshot of that picture. Like, so
Oh,
they
that's
were
nice.
invested. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, you never know who's like following along. And like if you read the name, you wouldn't know that this was like an influential person that was following our work, but it helps to share. I think again, it's shared accountability. Like it aligned the team around what we were working on, and it also, I think it was a different way of embodying our principle of working in the open, right? Like and being radically transparent.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that, to that point, right? Like you realize you get those bits of feedback of, I'm watching, you get those, and it's encouraging, right? Like it reinforces what you're doing as the right thing. And I think, when I first, JP was comms, right? And when him and I first met to talk about like, I have some ideas on where, how we can do comms. And, I think typical government communications, right, is very rigid, guarded, and, formal. And I just thought, man, this is going to be a tough conversation because JP is going to want to do a press release at the beginning and a press release at the end. But we started talking about ideas around how could we be more, do just like we were, how could we ship light releases on comms? And we started talking about the idea of like the done doing, which was fairly simple, right? And it was bullet points. Here's what was done, and bullet points. And I think we linked in some cases, we linked directly to the GitHub issue so people could see what the issue was, what the communications was, when it opened, when it closed, and then the doing linked, again to issues. So it felt very, referential. So in the context of the work and the comms, and it felt like it was an embellishment. And I think JP did an amazing job in helping us get into that flow and share that message out. Let's kind of wind down a little bit. I know, Angie, you mentioned that other folks are setting up digital services, to varying degrees of success. But this idea of alpha, right, is still an opportunity for whether you already have a digital service firm at a top level, like a state agency, or you want to do it within an agency, this idea of like, let's create an alpha. And I think it would be interesting to hear from everyone, what would be your advice, your recommendations on what you would do and what you wouldn't do when standing up an alpha. So Kim, you want to start?
What would I do? Well, definitely leave behind the classifications and the structure and look for unique skill sets and gaps and putting people together. Government really leans to having people at certain levels, and your level's really not important, I think. So that's a piece that I take with me now, even when I'm working with teams now, really leaving that I'm this classification, this person behind, and just taking their unique skills to build. I personally have moved a lot of what I learned from Alpha I use today. I'm using my agile principles, running with a product team, with a product director. So I've tried to leverage every aspect that I took from being open and transparent, trying to engage more with Californians and the users on that side. So to me, I think Art touched on it. In every aspect I do now, I'm still working towards a mission to deliver to California. So I try to leverage every piece that I took as value from Alpha.
I was incredibly impressed with like the ability of Kimberly and Angie to select projects that we could be successful on. Because sometimes it didn't work out. I remember like Rebecca covered 15 feet of whiteboard with a flow chart on whether you had to pay taxes early. And it seemed like she was being driven mad. Like so, or sometimes you don't have, a collaborative partner, and there's so many things you have to deal with.
Yeah.
terms of finding something where you can actually be useful. And so that was amazing, what you pulled off there, finding things that we contribute to.
Yeah, that's a good point. Picking the right projects. Carter, anything?
Yeah, I
Do's
think,
and don'ts.
well, certainly the thing that makes Alpha special is that we had the trust all the way up, and that we basically didn't have to worry about executives meddling in what we're doing. It seemed like we were just doing things, and they were like, "All right, let's see what happens." And that's pretty rare. It's usually like the executive wants us. Okay, that's what we're doing. You don't really just for a moment. You're doing user research technically, and the products are generated from the research. So that's special. So anybody going to do this, it's like find a way to get as much trust as you can to do the work, and then people will do the right thing based on what the research says.
Yeah. Angie, anything on do's and don'ts?
Don't overthink it. Do trust your team. Do build partnerships and bring people along. Don't over-engineer. Do the done doings. And don't be mean. Just establish trust with the team. I think to what Kim was saying earlier, a culture that I think we seeded in our approach was that we showed up sure with our roles that we have been selected to apply in the experiment, but we all knew like at the end of the day we're still like human, and we each also just brought like different energy and enthusiasm and eagerness to want to learn. And there were other skills that came into play that were not necessarily tied back to your classification, right? Like, so I think it's important to just recognize the team that you have. To answer your question, my recommendation would be like, if you don't have necessarily a dedicated team, I would say dedicate time and empower a team to work on a select project that you're trying to like untangle for a small dedicated period of time, and give them permission and time and just not a blessing, but literally give them the space to just ideate, iterate, troubleshoot, and trust them to handle it. And whenever you need to unblock them, like do that for them on their behalf to make sure that they have the resources and the time that they need to be successful. I think what was made Alpha special was that that was all our focus. It was focusing on Alpha. And I think most digital service teams now, and including like in California, I think, and just abroad, is that we got caught up in the hot topic or priority of the moment. And so that neglects time from actually focusing deeply and widely on like transformational innovation efforts and sprints that actually move the needle across the entire ecosystem. And so if you have it within your ability to be able to create space, dedicated space for a team, and even if it's not branded as like a full-time team, but just a sprint team to focus on a particular issue, I think, and apply a lot of these principles, I think you will see movement in that service or that problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would just say, like, I think, obviously kind of a broken record, but like, do work in the open, because you will learn about yourself. It will be more fun. And it's truly kind of connecting kind of public service in a new way that, I think is important for civil society going forward. So last question, looking back at all of it, what surprised you the most about Alpha, and how do you hope it will be remembered? Carter, you want to start?
Well, come to Alpha. it was surprising how we went into do in-person work when we were really pivoting towards doing remote work at the time. It was all about how many remote days we're going to have, et cetera. This was all before COVID. And I was surprised. I think it was Angie who was kind of trying to get us to, and Kimberly as well, trying to get us to work in person. And I was like, oh, this is a step backwards. We should be working remote. So that was a huge surprise that if it's done right, if you have deliberate roles and you do what we did, you can make in-person work. And that was a big surprise to me. That was my huge takeaway from that. I would love to see this kind of project happen again. I think it's absolutely something that could be repeated and have new successes.
Yeah. Art?
I'll make a comment on the last question as well. Just really quickly that, it's really easy to focus on like a particular outcome or tangible results. But I think treating projects like this as like a team culture, a digital team culture project, you're going to get a lot more out of it because all your projects moving forward will get exponentially better. And then the team will, once you change that culture, the team can't go back to a less, efficient way of working or anything like that. So I think of that as, think of more of the soft outcomes, if you will, the team culture outcomes, rather than a particular, did you meet the deadline? Did you ship something? That was just my point on that. But yeah, surprising. Yeah, I mean, I think there was a lot of different learnings and surprises. I think one of the things that was a realization for me was like, it's a lot more difficult to deliver a digital service rather than, we're used to just publishing a lot of information and things, but like how much harder, there's like a really big sort of gap between putting out information and turning something into an actual digital service, and how much more effort and partnerships that take to go from just putting out information and building a digital service, and how important partnerships are, collaboration partnerships, especially external stakeholders, and those digital service providers.
Yeah.
That was probably the biggest.
Kimberly?
Yeah, I think I would just echo a lot to what everybody else has said. I think it was just an amazing experience. I think I've heard we would all open the door to doing it again and learning from it. So I don't think it was surprising. I think the big surprising thing I think back to is I think a lot of people thought, oh, they can't do that in 12 weeks.
Yeah.
You can't accomplish those kinds of goals or achieve these kind of processes in this short period of time. And so I think to me, it was surprising that we could easily iterate and ship and deploy on a regular basis. And so that was kind of an amazing experience. It didn't take this long, drawn out process. So,
Aaron?
This was my first time working in government, and I came in with this kind of naive expectation that government has all these resources and, they're not doing things efficiently, but, it's actually full of heroic people doing a lot with, less resources than you might be used to for a similar project in the private industry in a lot of cases. And this was like seriously one of those. And then this team carries that into, a lot of subsequent projects. And, we were able to meet tons of other people throughout the state that are, really doing a ton for the residents of California without a ton of resources. And that was, really, really cool to see and be part of.
Yeah, and I think for me, right, like I had no expectation. I thought it was just going to be a fun project. Hearing and seeing kind of bits of the work that we did still like out there, and like even like little things like I see the state using public songs, which is something that we implemented from day one, and even like the COVID stuff and the degree, I think that like the narrative of alpha was lost because of COVID, and we, everybody had to pivot to that. So we lost kind of the narrative that, we're kind of doing now. But I think this idea of like what a small project like alpha could do to help scale impact, ripple impact across government is pretty powerful. And I didn't expect that. Angie, I'll let you close us out.
I'll just say that as Luke and I were preparing to talk through this podcast, I told them that it didn't feel right for me and for just us to like lead it. Like, what made Alpha special was the fact that we had the team, and this is all of you, right? Like, and being able to capture the story through your own words and your memories, and your personal experience with it is really what was important in all of this for me. And I hope that I know that there's so much more about alpha that we could have said and we can't possibly capture in an hour and a half and like 3 segments, but I hope that it is remembered by you all and like whoever listens to this, that it is possible to try new things in a different way. When you have a team, you trust your team, and you collectively tackle the problems together. And that aspects of the culture and this approach that we were able to create together during that time that have now seeded in other efforts and initiatives, that we can continue to build on that momentum and see that practice of working in the open and like being accessible and making sure that it's performant, that we can continue to embody those practices across every other team that we may engage with, and that they can like embrace it for themselves. And that's my hope. And thank you, Luke, and everyone.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the GovFresh podcast. To subscribe and hear past episodes, visit podcast.govfresh.com.